As anyone who has ever learned to play a musical instrument will know, they aren't exactly cheap. A great deal of effort and know-how goes into crafting each one, and they can easily set you back hundreds or even thousands of dollars. There are some, though, that are highly sought after because of the rich sounds that they can produce, their rarity and historical significance, and as a result can command far higher prices. From famous guitars to one-of-a-kind creations that are hundreds of years old, these are the top 15 most expensive musical instruments. Number 15. Elton John's Caesar Palace Piano, $1 million. Elton John is one of the most successful recording artists of all time, having forged a career since 1967. He's released more than 30 albums and sold in excess of 300 million records worldwide, which means that when he performs, there's no shortage of people wanting to see him live. With such a back catalog of hits, he had several multi-year residences in Las Vegas during his career, but probably the biggest was the $1 Million Piano Show that debuted at the Coliseum in 2011. As the name would suggest, the grand piano that he played during this 3-year residency cost $1 million to make, but this was no ordinary piano. Custom made by Yamaha, it had 68 LED screens built into it that could either show live or pre-recorded video, as well as be programmed to display a range of colors and animations that would move in time with the music being played. Amazingly, it took 4 years to build the instrument, which was a full 1 year longer than it took to build the Coliseum itself. Set in the center of the venue's 125-foot wide stage, this had to have been one of the most spectacular musical shows ever put in Vegas, where the focus was purely on the musicians and their instruments, and it cemented Elton John's place as one of the all-time musical greats. Number 14. Jimi Hendrix Isabella Stratocaster, $2 million. Jimi Hendrix will always be remembered as one of the greatest guitar legends to have ever graced a stage, and you can only imagine the heights he would have achieved had his career not been tragically cut short. In the few years that he was able to entertain the masses, though, he put on some of the greatest performances ever, and there are a number of guitars that he once owned that are now worth significant amounts of money. The most valuable, though, is his 1968 Olympic white Fender Stratocaster, which he called Isabella. It was this guitar that he took with him to Woodstock and used to play a medley of his hits before freestyling for a few minutes and playing one of the most memorable versions of the Star-Spangled Banner that's ever been seen. There's no doubt that this guitar has an important place in rock and roll history, and it seems only right that it was sold to Microsoft's Paul Allen in the 90s for $2 million. Now a permanent fixture at the Experience Music Project Museum in Seattle, it's also a fitting tribute to Hendrix, who was born in the city. Number 12. Gasparo Bertolotti Cello, Viola, $542,000. Gasparo Bertolotti was an Italian musician and master craftsman who lived between 1542 and 1609. Renowned as being one of the first great instrument producers, he mainly created violins and double basses for his wealthy patrons. It's believed by historians that his designs for these instruments represent some of the first for violins in the modern form as we expect them today, where they're needed to be much more powerful and more easily projected than previous iterations, because this was when larger orchestras started to become the norm. Referred to in official documents as a maestro di violini or violin master as early as 1568, his creations were some of the most sought after across Europe, and he'd go on to teach 5 apprentices his ways too. Of all the instruments he's believed to have made, only 80 are thought to have survived to this day. And thanks to both their historical significance and unparalleled sound, they are extremely valuable. Surprisingly, though, despite being known in particular for his violins, it was one of his violas that set the record for a price at an auction. Although admittedly only 5 of his instruments have been known to be sold in that way since 1893, the viola, which cost just over $500,000 in 2010, is the most expensive one to have ever been sold that wasn't made by the most famous manufacturer of all, Stradivarius. Number 11. OM45 Deluxe Acoustic Guitar from C.F. Martin & Company, $554,000. The beauty of guitars is that the price you pay for one doesn't necessarily impact the overall quality of sound you can produce with it, in the same way as is the case with other instruments. You can buy one for very little money and begin to perfect your skills, and the older ones that were crafted by some of the greatest manufacturers are instead left for collectors to bid over. That being said, the OM45 Deluxe acoustic guitar that was made in 1930 is an incredibly stunning instrument. The company, which made the instrument since 1833, is most popular for its steel string acoustic guitars, and in the late 20s and early 30s, in many people's eyes, their heyday. What makes this particular guitar even more special, though, is that they only made 14 of them that year, with the design that most believe is the most beautiful and most collectible of all. When one was put up for auction in 2009, it was estimated to get a maximum of $250,000, but in the event it went on to be sold for more than twice that, with a final price of $554,500. Number 10. Eric Clapton's favorite Stratocaster, Blackie, $959,000. With a career that spanned almost 60 years and having been inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame a record-breaking 3 times, Eric Clapton is, without a doubt, one of the most influential guitarists of all time. He's played with countless different bands as well as being a soloist, and is definitely someone to listen to when he says which types of guitar sound the best. Originally, he only played Gibson guitars, but made the switch to Fender Stratocasters in 1970 after seeing what Jimi Hendrix had been able to achieve with one. His first, which had a brown finish, became known as Brownie, but it was the next one, which was called Blackie because of its color, would become his favorite. It was the main guitar he used for performances and in the studio between 1974 and 1985, and was the one he used to record hits like I Shot the Sheriff, Cocaine, Lay Down Sally, and some of the later versions of Layla. In many ways, the guitar is as important to rock history as the man himself, and despite meaning so much to him, Clapton showed his philanthropic credentials when he donated Blackie to an auction in 2004 to help support the Crossroads Center, a rehab center that he founded. It would eventually sell for $959,500, making it one of the most expensive guitars in the world. Number 9. The Lady of Tennant Stradivarius Violin, $2 million. Antonio Stradivari, who was born in Italy in 1644, is known as being probably the best violin maker to have ever lived. During his career, he's believed to have made 1,116 instruments, 960 of which were violins, and it's thought that as many as 650 of them have survived to this day. It's a combination of their beauty and their warm sound that they produce that puts Stradivarius instruments in a class of their own, particularly ones that were made during his golden period, and any that can be proved to have been made by him are in extremely high demand, and as a result are incredibly expensive. The Lady of Tennant violin was made by him in 1699, which was actually 1 year before the start of his golden age, but nonetheless is a very impressive instrument. It's been owned by several prominent violinists, including Charles Philippe Lafont in the 19th century, and following his death was sold by a London dealer to Sir Charles Clow Tennant, who gifted it to his wife, who it's now named after. The Lady of Tennant was one of the more recent Stradivarius violins to be offered up at auction in April of 2005, at which time it sold for an astonishing $2,032,000. It's now owned by a wealthy patron of the arts and is often loaned to high-profile violinists who perform in America.
We're constantly adding more people to the Top 5's production team to bring you all the best content. Be sure to subscribe with notifications on and hit the like button.
Number 8. Steinway Z piano that was owned by John Lennon, $2.08 million. As a member of the Beatles, John Lennon became one of the world's first pop stars and remains to this day a legend within the industry. During his tours around the world, he was fortunate enough to play some of the most spectacular pianos in existence, but it was his humble Steinway Z upright piano, complete with cigarette burns from where he stubbed them out, that was his favorite. It was this piano that he composed and performed most of his Beatles and solo recordings on, and it's the one that features in the music video for Imagine. He'd originally bought it from Steinway & Sons in London for £1,000, which was the equivalent to around $1,600 at the time, and had it shipped to his sound studio in Sunningdale. When people think of Imagine, it's the white grand piano that normally comes to mind, but this is the true special instrument that was close to his heart, and that's why there was a great deal of interest in it from within the music industry when it was offered for auction in the year 2000. Selling to an anonymous phone bidder for a price of $2.08 million, which at the time was a record for a piano. The new owner later transpired to be none other than George Michael. Number 7. Reach Out to Asia Fender Stratocaster, $2.8 million. The music industry has long been associated with philanthropic purists to help bring people together to raise awareness and much-needed funds to help those in need. So in the wake of the devastating tsunami in the Indian Ocean, a number of high-profile artists helped out with an auction. Held in aid of Reach Out to Asia, a charity dedicated to providing relief to the people in the region, a white Fender Stratocaster was entered as one of the lots. But this was no ordinary guitar. It had been signed by an unbelievable number of rock and roll legends, including Paul McCartney, Eric Clapton, Mick Jagger, Sting, Brian May, Jimmy Page, all the members of Def Leppard, and many, many more. With a pure white body, with silver accents along the neck and on the top end, the signatures, all done in black pen, stand out in an incredible way and made for a one-of-a-kind collector's piece. It's amazing that all of these artists lent their support, and the response by the public when the guitar was sold off in Doha, Qatar, was extraordinary. In the end, it was purchased by Her Highness Sheikha Miyasa Al Thani for an incredible price of $2.8 million, eclipsing the previous record for the most expensive guitar to have ever been sold. Number 6. Hammer Stradivarius Violin, $3.5 million. Having been dated to being made in 1707, thanks to an inscription on the back, the Hammer Stradivarius Violin is one that is known to have been made during the famed creator's golden period. Measuring 36 centimeters or 14 inches long, is widely regarded as one of the best examples of his work and is an absolutely stunning instrument. It's a little surprise then that whenever it's been offered for sale, collectors around the world have tried their best to secure it for themselves. The first owner was Swedish collector Christian Hammer, who acquired it during the 19th century and who it's named after. Around the year 1911, it made its way to the US in the possession of a violin performer and teacher called Bernard Sinsheimer, and after changing several times over the following decades, it was purchased by a Japanese oil company from an estate sale in 1992. The new owners lent the instrument to Japanese violinist Kyoko Takazawa, who performed with it for the next 12 years. But the hammer was eventually put up for auction in May of 2006. With an expected guide price of around $1.5 million, everyone was stunned when it finally sold to an anonymous bidder for more than double that, with a final sale price of $3.54 million. Number 5. The Paganini Stradivarius Cello, $6 million+. While Stradivarius is, of course, best known for the violins that he made, they only account for around half of all the instruments he produced. One of the others, a cello, broke records when it was sold in 2012, and if stories are correct, it was once very nearly thrown away. Known as the Paganini Cello after a former owner, the instrument was discovered in 1822 as it was being transported through the streets of Milan on the way to a municipal dump. Made in 1707 during Stradivarius's golden period, it's one of only 60 cellos believed to have survived since then, and only 20 Forma B versions. Despite having been dissected and copied numerous times, as well as undergoing significant repairs in the 90s, the cello is said to have an incredible sound, which, while slightly coarse to the ear of the player, develops a velvety smoothness as it travels out into the openness of a music hall to the ears of listeners. An instrument like this very rarely makes its way to market, but the Paganini is believed to have been bought by an anonymous arts patron for more than $6 million, one of the highest figures ever paid for a cello. Number 4. Lady Blunt Stradivarius Violin, $15.9 million. The Lady Blunt Stradivarius Violin is the second most expensive violin ever known to have been sold, and was created by the legendary master at the peak of his golden period in 1721. Incredibly, it's said to have survived in near-perfect condition because it's mostly been owned by collectors and not by anyone who would dare try to play such a valuable object. Still with its original neck, the first known owner was Jean-Baptiste Vieuxtemps, who apparently found it in Spain in the 1860s. He then sold the violin to Lady Anne Blunt, who was the daughter of Ada Lovelace and the granddaughter of Lord Byron, and who the instrument is now named after. In the following years after her death, it changed hands several times, and by 2008 it was sold to Nippon Music Foundation in a private transaction for $10 million. Following the 2011 earthquake that devastated large parts of Japan, the violin was donated to an auction to help raise funds for those in need, and on this occasion, it was sold to an anonymous buyer for an incredible $15.9 million, which was, at the time, the most expensive a violin had ever been sold for. Number 3. Vieuxtemps Violin, $16 million. The surprising thing about the world of expensive instruments is that just when you think you know which ones are going to be the most valuable, there's one that breaks the trend. With so many of the highest prices going to Stradivari instruments, you'd expect the violin price record to be held by one, but it isn't. Instead, the violin that currently holds the world record price is called the Vieuxtemps Violin, and it was created by Giuseppe Guarneri. He was another famous instrument maker who created this particular violin in 1741. The Vieuxtemps is widely regarded as his best work by historians and violinists alike, and it takes his name from Henri Vieuxtemps, who was a world-renowned Belgian violinist that once owned it in the 19th century. It has been impeccably looked after and maintained, and has never required even minimal patching. It's therefore virtually identical to how it was when it left the workshop all those years ago, and this was one of the reasons it's seen as being so valuable. While this violin has never been put up for auction, it was reportedly bought in a private transaction in 2012. And while the full amount has never been disclosed, it's been revealed that it was more than $16 million. Fortunately, despite being owned by a private collector, it's still possible to hear the beauty of the instrument because American violinist Anna Kiko Myers was granted lifetime use of it. Number 2. The Dewport Stradivarius Cello, $20 million. Made by Antonio Stradivari during his golden period in 1711, the Dewport cello is widely seen as being the best example of this type of instrument in the world. It's a B-form cello, a style that Stradivari designed in 1709, following requests from clients that he produce something slightly smaller and versatile than other designs, and also took advantage of the recent advances in the way strings were attached to instruments. It's thought this particular cello was made as a special order for François Cicogno, the personal physician of King Louis XIV, and following his death in 1752, it was sent to Paris to be sold by a private dealer. Amazingly, the full provenance of the cello is known, including the fact that it was once held by Napoleon after a concert, and that a dent is still visible on the side of the instrument that was a result of his rough handling of it. The owner at that time, Jean-Louis Dewport, is who the cello was named after, and it would go on to change hand a number of times over the following century. In 1974, it was bought by Mstislav Rostropovich, who was a renowned Russian cellist and conductor, and it soon became his outright favorite. Quite what has happened to the cello in recent years isn't entirely clear, but the most recent report suggests that it was purchased by the Nippon Music Foundation in Japan for $20 million. Rostropovich's heirs, however, claim that it still belongs to them, but since it hasn't been seen in public in more than 20 years, it could be anywhere by now. Number 1. The McDonald Stradivarius Viola, $45 million. For those unfamiliar with orchestral instruments, a viola is virtually the same as a violin, but is slightly different in terms of the shape and the sound that it produces. Antonio Stradivari was also an exceptionally accomplished creator of violas as well as violins, but because he made far fewer of them, they're much rarer and therefore far more valuable. The McDonald Viola was crafted by Stradivari in 1719 during his golden period, and is said to be in a class of its own compared to any other instrument. So perfect is the balance, the sound, and ease of playing that it's truly one of a kind. In fact, only 10 Stradivarius violas are still thought to exist, of which the McDonald is by far the best. The only problem for collectors is that it's only been made available to buy once in the past 50 years. It was previously owned by Peter Schidloft, who was the co-founder of the Amadeus Quartet, and after he died in 1987, it was put into storage by his family. It only reappeared in 2014 when they decided to put it up for auction, with an astonishing reserve price of $45 million. Despite significant interest, it is yet to be sold, but even if it does eventually go for a fraction of what the family think it's worth, it could still easily be the most expensive instrument to have ever been sold.
Watch our binge-watching playlist if you'd like to watch all of our most popular top 15 videos. Grab a drink, grab a snack, and get ready to binge.